What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a comparison between two of the most popular lift options for the 5th gen 4Runner. We will be installing and talking about the Bilstein 5100s and comparing them to the OME Emu Nitrocharger Sports that have been running for the last 3 years. We will be doing some off-road testing to see how they stack up in performance, comfort, and value. And we will also be doing some measurements to compare wheel travel, so stay tuned. So when considering a suspension lift for your 4Runner, it's important to evaluate both your needs and your budget. Most of us aren't catching air or racing across the desert at high speeds. And while a high-end suspension lift can offer premium features and performance, a budget lift provides a practical, cost-effective solution that can still enhance your vehicle's capabilities and aesthetics. The Bilstein 5100s and the Nitrochargers are excellent options for those that want to elevate their ride to hit the trails on weekends without, a hefty price tag. So let's start off by looking at the Bilstein 5100s. So for a full set of 4 shocks, I paid $470 US off of Amazon with free shipping. I will leave part numbers and links in the description below if you're interested in picking up these shocks. And for the record, I am not sponsored by OME Emu, ARB, or Bilstein. These are my personal opinions. And I'll try to be as fair as possible. Okay, so chances are you've heard of the Bilstein 5100s. The Bilstein 5100s stand out as one of the best value-oriented options on the market due to their exceptional balance of performance, durability, and affordability. These shocks are known to last a very long time. They're designed for both stock and lifted trucks and SUVs, and they offer a nice mix of handling and comfort thanks to their monotube design or high gas pressure. The adjustable ride height feature or perches on this shock allow users to customize the lift height using their original factory coils. So you can lift your 4Runner with just the shocks on their own. And the fact that you can lift your vehicle using your factory coils makes these a very versatile and cost-effective option. You can also use them with a number of different aftermarket lift coils or springs. I'll show you how this adjustability sets them apart and some different lift options for different budgets. Let's jump into that.
All right, so the Bilstein 5100s give you a number of different options with the different perches that it provides. So with stock coils, if you use perch 1, you will have a stock ride height here and just upgraded shocks. If you use perch 2, you'll get just a little bit of lift in the front, just under 1 inch, and this will give your vehicle a leveled look. If you use perch 3, you will get just under 2 inches of lift. And at this point, you can start using a spacer on the rear to kind of get a little bit more lift on the rear to give your vehicle more of a lift and leveled look. If you use perch 4, you'll get 2.5 inches of lift on the front. And at this point, you might want to change your upper control arms to maintain your caster. And if you use a 2-inch lift coil in the rear, this will give your vehicle kind of a leveled look. Maybe you'll have a little bit of rake in the back. Rake being your rear end is a little bit higher than your front end. If you use lift coils with the Bilstein 5100s, you'll get just a little bit of better ride quality and anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of lift, depending on the lift coils that you use. A popular choice is to use the OME Emu coils and choose the right coil for the amount of lift you want and for your vehicle's weight.
Okay, so how do the Bilstein stack up against the OME Emu Nitrochargers in terms of cost? Well, the OME Emus don't have the same adjustable perches. The OME Emus usually offer a pretty good package deal, which includes the coils and shocks. They have 2 package options. One is normal for stock builds, and they also have medium for some builds with added weight like armor. You can also get heavier coils if you need them for your build, but those are sold separately through OME Emu. The Nitrochargers offer a twin tube design, and in theory, these should be more comfortable on the road. Personally, I found them to be quite firm, so you really do feel the road, but this also means that they do handle quite nicely, around the city and on the highway. As my rig got heavier, they did seem to get a bit more comfortable or a little softer. I felt like the shocks handled the weight really well for, big drops or on big whoops that were spread out. But whenever I encountered bumpy terrain or washboards at higher speeds, I felt like I had difficulty controlling the vehicle. The back end started to feel loose and I would experience bucking from time to time. Basically, I felt like the rear end would start to bounce after a series of bumps. Now, I may just be oversprung in the back, but before I switched to heavier coils in the back, I also noticed this, so it may just be the way that the shocks are tuned for this particular vehicle. My Nitrochargers now have 50,000 miles on them, and they have taken all the abuse I've thrown at them. As you can see, there are no leaks in the shocks, but the paint is chipping and rusting quite badly. Depending on where you live, this may not be a big deal, but where I live, it's in the Rust Belt. So, I really wish the coating was a bit better. Other than the paint, they are definitely a very durable shock that I think excels for heavier builds. All right, I'll quickly take you through the process of how I installed the Bilstein shocks. Then we will do some tests, compare wheel travel, and I will provide a review for you. If you want to skip the install and go straight to the review, I have created chapters in this video, but let's jump into it.
All right, so with the vehicle on the ground, you can loosen up all of your lug nuts, set your e-brake, and chock both back tires. Then you're going to want to jack the vehicle up. You can do this under the front skid plate, and then put your jack stands in place. Once they are in place, you can lower the vehicle down onto the jack stands and finish removing the wheel. Take the wheel off now on both sides and slide it under the vehicle just to support the vehicle in case it comes down. With the 22mm now, you're going to want to remove these 2 bolts under the steering knuckle. So completely remove both of those bolts and put them off to the side. Now you can remove the 19mm bolt off the bottom of the shock. Just tap that bolt out using a long flathead screwdriver. Then on the top, you'll have 3 14mm nuts you'll need to remove. Use the interlocking wrench technique that I just showed you there. This will help you get enough leverage and to get to the back of that far bolt, which is tricky to get to. And then break those loose and remove all 3 of those. You can leave one just a little bit in place just to hold it in place until you're ready to take the shock right out. So support that disc there and put a lift under the lower control arm. This will keep it in position. And then mark all 4 cams on each side. So there'll be a cam on the front and back of each bolt. And just mark those and then remove those bolts and nuts using a 22mm with a breaker bar. Then you can lower that jack down and the shock should just slide right out. We're now ready to compress the spring so we can remove the top hat off of the old strut. This is a bit of a tedious process and can take a while, but once you notice that there is no more tension on that top strut, you're now ready to remove the bolt or the nut off the top. I use a set of vice grips and I think a 17 or 19mm here. Once that nut is off, you can slide that top hat off and get that coil off of the old strut. Now we want to assemble our Bilsteins, so put that bottom support in, slide the coil on, and then put that washer in place. Okay, so on the top hat, make sure that that bushing is in the bottom. This is an alignment bushing, and if it isn't there, it will not seat properly and it will not align your shocks properly, so make sure your bushing is in place. And then you can slide that top hat on, and then we'll slide another bushing on there, and then we'll put our final washer on. And now we can start putting that 19mm nut on the top. So turn it, use a 7mm to hold it in place, and just keep turning it until you tighten it down. You're supposed to do about 20 foot-pounds of torque there. And make sure that your lower opening is in the correct orientation with the top bolts so that you can slide this in correctly. If you don't have it perfectly lined up, you can just use a long bar or a long screwdriver to kind of move it into place so that that lower bolt in the shock will line up correctly. All right, so we're now ready to slide the shock in. So slide it up through the bottom, just like how we removed it. And then you can lightly put those 3 14mm nuts in place and then just start jacking up the lower control arm and then slide that bolt in with the washer and put that 19mm nut on. You can now finish tightening up these top nuts. Now we're ready to start putting those 2 bolts into the lower bottom knuckle. So I used 22mm and I torqued these to 118 foot-pounds of torque each. All right, so we'll now want to just kind of slide these cams into the correct position and just tighten up these bolts, not fully because we're going to tighten them on the ground. We can now start putting the wheel back on and we'll get our vehicle off those jack stands and we'll lower it down to do our final torquing of the lower control arm bolt. So torque your wheels to spec. Depends if you have aluminum or steel. There's different torque specs. I did 80 foot-pounds of torque. All right, so we'll now slide all 4 cams on each side, 8 total, into position, and then we're going to tighten down these bolts and nuts to tighten up our lower control arm while the vehicle is on the ground, and that's 129 foot-pounds of torque for each of these bolts and nuts. We can also tighten down fully that lower shock bolt. This is 70 foot-pounds of torque. All right, we are now ready to move on to the back shocks. So we'll chock the 2 front tires. We'll loosen the lugs on both of those back wheels, and then we'll jack up in the middle of our axle there. Once we have it high enough, we'll slide those jack stands into place on both sides. We'll lower the vehicle down onto the jack stands, and then we'll remove both of the rear tires. Remove that tire, slide it under your skid plate for extra insurance, and also put a jack stand under your axle if you'd like, and then we'll just spray a little penetrating lubricant on that top nut on the shock. We'll use a 17 or a 19mm wrench to get this off, depending on your shocks. Once that's off, you can remove the washer and the bushing, slide the shock down a little, you can just compress it by hand to get those off. Then we'll take a 17mm and we'll remove this lower shock bolt. Once that's off, compress the shock a little bit and then wiggle it back and forth to get it off of that lower axle mount. The axle mount can get a little rusty, so you may need to work it a little bit. So looking at your shock, we'll have two washers here. We want the washer with the thicker opening on first, so slide that washer on. Then we'll put this bushing on with the top piece on it. So slide that on. This is actually going to go into our alignment washer, which is right here. We want the alignment washer with the thicker sleeve on the top. That's the correct one for the 5th gen 4Runner. So slide that on. Our shock is now ready to go on the vehicle, but first we have to clean off that lower mounting spot. It is pretty rusty, so just sand it a little bit. Yours may be okay, mine wasn't. So I sanded a little bit. I put the washer on, and then I put a lubricant kind of rust preventer just to get this on easier and to prevent rusting in the future. So get that shock on that lower mount and then tighten up that 17 mil bolt. We'll finish torquing it in just a moment, but first we'll put this bushing on and this top washer. You may need to jack up your axle to get enough threads to screw on that top nut. You may need channel locks, and you'll torque that nut on the top to 20 foot-pounds of torque. Then moving to the bottom, we'll torque this one down to 72 foot-pounds of torque. Then we can put our wheel on, and that is the installation of the rear shocks. So for the front end, I didn't notice any difference in articulation or wheel travel. I think there's other limiting factors other than the shocks there for wheel travel, but for the rear, I did notice a difference. The Bilstein 5100s do not provide as much travel as the OME Emu Nitrochargers. The OME Emu Nitrochargers give me a little bit over an inch of extra rear wheel travel, and that does make sense because they are twin tube, and twin tube should have more travel than mono tube shocks.
All right, so I'm taking the Bilstein 5100s out here for a test drive. This is the first ride, and right away, the vehicle's characteristics, the handling characteristics, and just the quality of the ride is different. I'm noticing that there's a bit more body roll around the corners. Initially, there's a little bit of a softer kind of engagement with the shocks, and then it kind of tightens up right away. So a little bit more initial body roll when I brake. There's definitely a little bit more nosedive. And when I was actually backing up out of my driveway, I hit the brakes, and right away I noticed the rear kind of squatted a bit more and the front end came up a little bit when I hit the brakes while going in reverse. But definitely while going forward, there's a little bit more brake dive. So I believe they are a bit of a softer shock. At least that first little bit of engagement in the shock is softer. This, of course, is causing a more of a softer, more comfortable ride on the road, which I actually quite like. I know some people like a firm ride, but for me, I like it to be a little bit soft. I like the first part of that shock to just be a little bit soft, to take those bumps, to make the car feel more like, a Cadillac instead of like a race car. So that's a couple things I've noticed. Definitely a bit more body roll. And yeah, just a little bit of that brake dive. When I do hit big kind of potholes in the road, it does absorb those quite nicely. And I do get maybe a little bit more of a bounce, just it kind of engages, dampens, and then I kind of get a little bit of a bounce there that I didn't really notice with the Nitrochargers. All right, let's take these off-road now and let's see how they perform off-road. We'll hit a bunch of different kind of terrain. We'll hit some fast kind of potholes, some washboard. We'll see how these shocks react at higher speeds and slower speeds. Big whoops. Let's do it. All right, so just coming down a trail here that has some pretty big whoops. I'm gonna hit these at a higher speed and just see how the vehicle handles. They're kind of consistent one after another, so we'll just see how it does here. All right, so I'm pretty impressed with how it handled those whoops there. I didn't feel out of control at any point in time. Pretty soft and pretty slow. One thing I did notice is there isn't as much rebound dampening, I guess, just because these shocks don't have as much travel. So I did notice they topped out a lot easier, just because they're lacking, an inch, maybe a little bit more of shock travel. So the rebound dampening, that's one drawback, but at no point did they feel loaded or super bouncy. The rebound dampening was pretty smooth, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's now take them to some kind of off-road terrain here with some faster kind of potholes or washboard type terrain. Let's do it. All right, so we're gonna hit a bunch of rapid potholes here and just see how the shocks handle higher speeds and rapid compressions. Let's do it. So they're doing pretty good. I definitely think they might have an edge over the OME Emu Nitrochargers. Yeah, much smoother, much more controlled. And I thought these shocks would be like that. The rebound is perfect for quick, kind of consistent potholes or washboard. So really impressed with high speed compressions here. Very impressive shock. All right, so let's go back to the garage now, and we'll just do a kind of summary of both shocks, comparing the pros and cons of each one. I think this will be pretty interesting for anyone looking to either get the Nitrochargers or the Bilstein 5100s. I think they're both great shocks, but they definitely have pros and cons and different applications for different people and their needs. So let's head to the garage right now and do that review.
All right, let's quickly talk about how these shocks stack up. So the Bilsteins are a more comfortable ride on the road. The shocks absorb smaller bumps better, but this also results in more body roll while cornering and a little more brake dive. The Bilsteins seem to perform better at higher speeds, and their damping absorbs consistent, rapid hits better. I felt like I had better control while going off-road fast with these shocks. Unfortunately, the rear doesn't have as much travel, so rebound damping is affected with more lift height, and the shocks top out easier. If you're doing rock crawling or obstacles that require a lot of articulation in the back, these shocks may hold you back due to their limited travel. Okay, let's talk about the Nitrochargers. They definitely provide a rougher ride on the road. You feel every little bump in the road, but the Nitrochargers have less body roll while cornering and less brake dive. So they do handle better in town. They just aren't as comfortable. Unfortunately, at higher speeds, the Nitrochargers don't provide the best damping, and I felt a little less in control of the steering, especially in the rear. The experience was jarring, so if speed matters to you while off-roading, these may not be the right choice. With a lot of weight, these shocks do provide a better ride. They also provide more travel in the rear, which can help the rebound damping and improve your off-road capabilities. All right, so I think both shocks are a great choice for the 5th Gen 4Runner. It really depends on what you're using your vehicle for. Both are very reliable shocks that have a great track record. I think that sums up the video. If you guys like the content, please like and subscribe, and I hope to come out with a lot more content, so I really do appreciate your guys' support. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye now.